The footage found behind that locked service closet. A quiet clip from an old maintenance camera is the earliest known piece connected to this event, and it shows a locked service closet that should not have held anything unusual. That clip was later used by investigators who tried to understand what happened to a junior technician named Laron Pike, whose shift ended early in late autumn. They found the footage behind that same door after it had been sealed for weeks by building security. Laron Pike was 28 with a steady job as a technician at a mid-rise office block on the edge of a mid-sized city. He handled routine inspections and spent most days checking air units and replacing worn switches. On the day of the incident, he arrived before sunrise, and his plan was simple because he wanted to finish early and meet a friend for dinner. He logged his tasks on a small clipboard, then headed to the lower floors where a string of power flickers had been reported. The first sign that something was shifting came after he checked an electrical panel near the freight hall because he noticed a soft tapping that came from the service corridor behind him. It was not loud, but it was steady enough to make him pause, because the building rarely had any staff in that wing at that hour. He walked toward the hallway and found the locked service closet that should have been empty because it stored old filters and spare metal duct sheets. The tapping stopped the moment he approached the door, and he made a small note about it for later. He moved on with his list and kept checking units across the floor, but the strange pause near that closet lingered in his head. Later that morning, a cleaning worker named Pella Hargreaves reported that she saw a light under that closet door, even though the switch inside had been disconnected earlier that month. Her test was simple because she knocked on the door and the faint light flickered out immediately. She told Laron when she ran into him near the supply desk, and he wrote down her statement next to his earlier note. The building manager joined them once the reports were passed to the office, and they all went back to the service corridor to check the closet again. The door was still locked, and the manager said no one had a reason to enter it because the master inventory had been moved months earlier. They decided to leave it alone until they finished the primary checks on the power network. Laron helped with that sweep, and they found no major faults, although a few circuit logs showed brief voltage drops near the same hallway. Investigators later reviewed Laron's phone notes because he took quick photos of each panel during his shift. They found a single blurred image of the service closet taken in the early afternoon. The reflection in the metal doorframe looked off because it showed a thin line of motion near the bottom corner. It was unclear if that motion came from inside or if someone passed through the corridor at that moment. They checked the corridor camera to confirm, but the camera had been down for 3 days due to a loose wire. The most significant lead emerged after lunch when Laron told a colleague named Jarrell Penn that he heard something shift inside the closet as he passed through the hall again. Jarrell thought it might be a rodent because that wing often had small gaps behind the old walls. They planned to check it together after finishing a test on a cooling system. That test ended around mid-afternoon, and they returned to the closet with a simple plan to unlock it and take a quick look. According to Jarrell's later statement, there was a faint vibration under their feet when they approached the door. It felt like a small generator starting up in another room, although no system in that wing should have been active at that hour. Laron unlocked the door and pulled it open, and a rush of cold air slid out like someone had left a window open inside. The room had no windows and no active vents, yet their breath fogged slightly as they stepped forward. Inside, they found a portable monitor on a crate that should not have been there because no one had logged that equipment for months. The monitor was connected to a small camera that had been mounted near a pile of duct sheets. The camera pointed toward a narrow gap in the back wall that looked like an old access hole for cables. The monitor screen flickered with static for a few seconds before showing a short clip that repeated every time the image reset. The clip showed the back wall from the same angle, but it displayed a timestamp from late summer and showed someone stepping into the frame. The person wore a reflective vest and held a hammer. They looked like a contractor, but no clear face was visible because of the angle. The clip ended as soon as the figure leaned toward the gap and seemed to tap twice on the wall. The tap resembled the sound Laron heard earlier that morning. Investigators later tried to match the uniform to any registered contractors, but no record of that vest color or tool brand matched recent work orders. They traced the monitor's serial number and found it belonged to a batch that had been retired 2 years earlier. The crate also held a folder with printed maintenance sheets that ended mid-page, and the ink looked uneven, like someone had rushed through the printer without letting it warm up. The strangest part involved the temperature logs stored in the main system because they showed a sudden drop in that closet around the time Laren and Jarrell opened the door. The drop lasted less than a minute, but fell far lower than normal for that insulated space. Technicians tried to reproduce the effect during later tests, but found no way to drive the temperature down without active equipment. The final known movement of Laron came when he told Jarrell he wanted to check the narrow gap in the back wall because he thought it might lead to an unused conduit. Jarrell said he stepped out to grab a flashlight from the supply cart while Laron stayed near the crate studying the looping clip. When Jarrell returned, moments later, Laron was gone and the crate had been dragged 2 feet closer to the wall. There were no signs of a struggle and no debris on the floor. Security was called and a search was launched through every level of the building. They checked old blueprints and found that a small crawl space existed behind that wall, although records showed it had been sealed during renovations in the late 2000s. A remote camera was pushed inside during the search, but the crawl space ended in a collapsed section where cables hung like dead vines against concrete. Weeks later, the closet was officially sealed by the building manager. During that process, they found the small camera still recording, although its battery should have been empty long before that day. The final moments on the recovered footage showed the empty closet with the door slightly open. The cold air effect happened again because frost formed on the metal crate for several seconds before fading. No figure appeared on the clip, and no sound occurred except a soft tap that matched the earlier reports. The case remained open because no trace of Laron turned up anywhere in the building or the surrounding lots. Some investigators believed he crawled into the sealed gap and became trapped, although the remote camera found no sign to support that. Others thought the earlier contractor in the clip might have accessed the area for reasons that were never logged. Those theories remained unproven because no further evidence surfaced. The building keeps the closet sealed, and new tenants use the hallway without knowing much about the incident. Maintenance staff still mention the odd patch of cold air near that door when the seasons shift, but they treat it as a minor quirk that does not affect their routines. The older technicians say the footage probably captured a forgotten repair crew, even if the records were too messy to confirm that. The quiet clip remains in a small archive box in the manager's office. It shows an ordinary room, an old crate, and a narrow gap that never leads anywhere clear. It holds a brief record of a moment when something felt off in a place meant for simple repairs. It leaves a quiet reminder that even a locked service closet can hold questions that never settle completely. What this abandoned rest stop revealed still haunts investigators. Highway crews still talk about the rest stop like it is some quiet bruise on the side of the old state road, the kind you notice only when the weather turns gray and the trees start leaning a little too close to the pavement. The building is gone now, replaced by a fenced patch of gravel, but the story stuck because of what happened to a surveyor named Kieran Holt. The case file is dusty, the statements are messy, and the investigators who worked the first week still say they never really settled on one clean explanation. They just know something was wrong there, long before anyone realized they should have shut the place down tighter. Kieran was not the dramatic type. He was the kind of guy who always double-checked distances, kept backup batteries in his truck, and made small handwritten notes even when the radio logs were enough. He handled hundreds of miles of rural roads for the planning office, and that route took him through long stretches of quiet land where the only sound came from power lines humming over empty fields. People who knew him said he actually liked the silence because it made the work feel straightforward. He just measured things, wrote things, fixed things, and went home. That morning, he left before sunrise because he wanted to finish early and beat a patch of oncoming rain. The abandoned rest stop sat along his first checkpoint, and even though it had been closed for years, he still stopped there sometimes to take signal readings. It gave him a clear view of the ridge and the highway bend. It was habit more than necessity, and he had done it so many times that no one thought twice when they looked at his assigned route later. The patrol video that eventually became the anchor of the whole timeline showed his truck pulling up to the cracked entrance. He gets out, checks the sky, and walks toward the old restroom building with his binder under one arm. That is the last clear image of him moving normally. Everything after that is fragments. Investigators learned that the first thing that caught his attention was a shoe print, one clear print in a layer of pale dust near the doorway. It had sharp edges, almost fresh. He took a picture of it because that is what he did whenever something looked off. He was not paranoid, just methodical. He probably thought someone slept inside the building during the night. It happens sometimes on remote highways. He wrote down the time, circled the note, and stepped into the entrance. The hallway was dark and carried a strange, muffled echo, like the walls were padded even though they were just old tile. He heard a scraping sound from deeper inside. Not metal dragging, not an animal. Something steady and slow, like someone shifting their foot across grit. He called out, waited, and heard nothing. The sound stopped like it had been listening. Kieran walked back to his truck to radio the office, but his voice broke apart in static. The dispatcher later told investigators that the call sounded like it was underwater and bouncing through a long metal tube. She heard only fragments: his name, a location code, and something that sounded like movement inside. He tried again, and the signal died. That alone was unusual because that section of highway always had clean coverage. The binder recovered from his truck showed his own version of events. He wrote hallway sound, not wind, and then another line about a broken window at the back of the building. Investigators confirmed the window had been shattered outward. That meant something inside forced its way out, even though the inside had been boarded months earlier. Two highway workers driving through the area about an hour after Kieran arrived reported seeing a person moving inside the hallway. They saw the silhouette through the broken boards on the far window. They assumed it was Kieran and did not stop. Later, they both said the figure walked strangely, almost testing the ground each time it stepped forward. When Kieran failed to check in by midday, patrol deputies were sent to find him. His truck was still idling. The driver door was open. His binder was on the passenger seat with a page ripped halfway down. His pack lay near the broken window. The last photo on his camera showed the hallway inside the building. At the far end of the frame, barely visible, stood a faint figure leaning against the corner. No one could tell if it was facing the camera or facing away. Inside, deputies found scrape marks on the floor, thin, curved, following the left wall all the way to a locked storage room. The door showed no signs of force, yet the dust around it was swept clean in a straight line, as if something moved in and out repeatedly. The key they used to open it had to be fetched from the district office because no one had unlocked that door since the rest stop closed. Inside the storage room, they found an old maintenance cart shoved off to one side. Beneath it lay a faded maintenance log from the late 2000s mentioning a ventilation repair and a crawl opening behind a panel. The panel had been sealed for decades. The log was not supposed to be there. When investigators removed the panel, the cavity behind it ran deeper than any blueprint suggested. The air that came from the gap was cold and carried a metallic smell that clung to clothing. A search camera was lowered inside. The footage showed concrete walls narrowing into a crooked tunnel barely large enough for a grown man to crawl through. 10 feet in, the camera light hit something reflective. A highway vest, not folded, not discarded, hanging there in a slack curve as if someone had leaned their back against the wall and slid downward. No body, no markings, no drag trails. Just a vest that did not match any active crew assignments. Temperature drops inside the cavity were recorded several times. Each time the camera paused, the air dipped sharply. No external vents, no crosswind, no clear cause. The readings were entered into evidence but never explained. Investigators expanded the search into the forest beyond the rest stop. Dogs were brought in, drones were flown. For 3 days, they found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no cloth fibers. Only a small piece of metal near the far tree line, a fragment from a maintenance badge series retired decades earlier. Demolition crews arrived weeks later. They tore down the restroom buildings section by section. Workers reported strange acoustics in the hallway where Kieran took his final photo. Their tools sounded muted, as if wrapped in thick cloth. When they opened the wall near the crawl cavity, they found only a narrow, empty slot and a single metal hook drilled into the concrete. The hook had no purpose. The record showed no installation request. It faced inward, toward the cavity, like something had hung there long ago. In a thin layer of dust near the base of the cavity, they found a scrap of notebook paper. The edges were frayed as if torn in a hurry. The paper held two words in Kieran's handwriting: saw movement, no time, no location, no arrows, just those two words. Deputies later said the note bothered them more than anything else. He was careful, organized, and thorough. He always wrote full details. The only reason he would write something that vague was if he did not have time to write anything else. The rest stop was leveled to the foundation. The land was fenced off. The planning office rerouted all field checks away from the area. They said it was because the ground had become unstable, but the people who handled the paperwork knew that was just the clean explanation. Highway Patrol still reports occasional signal dips near the bend, only for a second, only when the morning fog is low. One deputy said he once saw a figure near the fence line in the gray light, standing too still to be a deer and too tall to be anyone from the service crew. When he turned the cruiser around, the figure was gone. The old case file sits in a drawer labeled Holt, Kieran. The binder, the camera, the scrap of paper, the vest, the temperature logs, the patrol video. None of it answers the basic question of where he went. Investigators who worked the early days still say the same thing when the topic comes up during late shifts. Whatever moved inside that building did not walk out through any of the exits. And whatever Kieran saw in that hallway moved first.